think we'll just kick off with the next one, try and keep the time. So I'll be covering O365 current attack trends today. A little bit about myself. I think quite a few people in the room I recognise faces of, so you've probably bored of this slide by now, but I've been doing technical security pretty much my entire life from an employment point of view. Started off as a Cisco security engineer and then went to work for public and private sector running security teams before, 9 years ago now, setting up 7 elements up here in Scotland to deliver security testing and incident response. I think my biggest learning points in life have always been through massive incidents and responding to them, not causing them generally, which is a useful side of the line to be on. I'm going to be drawing off a lot of that knowledge from incidents today to cover off O365. And this is building on the talk, if any of you guys came to my presentation last year at this same conference, which was looking at how do we go hunting in Office 365 for attacks. And this is taking a slightly different angle of it, of what are the current trends that we are seeing today based on incidents that you can take away. So my agenda today will be to run through, well, why would we want to be interested in compromising O365? We're going to have a look at an anatomy of an O365 attack at a high level, and then from there we will look through some of the attack trends that we're seeing in each of those different phases. And then more importantly, a little bit of mitigation that you can take away from yourselves today if you're either managing Office 365 ecosystems or if you are influencing individuals that are. So, why compromise Office 365? It's an internet-facing, data-rich resource, which is very appealing to malicious threat actors of various motives. Predominantly, we see it being implicated in business email compromise attacks where threat actors are trying to gain access to a mailbox to see if they can actually extract the business process of the organisation that would allow them to make malicious payments out of the organisation. And the majority of the cases that we work are focused on that. It's when an organisation has realised that they've got a compromised account, and unfortunately, most of the time it's when they've realised that money is being paid out of the organisation. And we're dealing with quite large sums of capital. So in 2 of the recent investigations we've done, one organisation lost in the hundreds of thousands of pounds bracket, and the most recent case, the third of 3 invoices that were being paid out to the organisation was in the $3 million bracket of payment. So the numbers get large very, very quickly. And this is borne out by NCSC's own analysis of business email compromise and the impact on the UK's economy. 32 million cost to the UK. The FBI put it at closer to 12.5 billion globally from a loss. And Europol have taken a look at this, and they've worked through the actors. And what it now is that the old Nigerian 419 scam gangs that used to send you an email pretending to be a prince trying to extract money out of a country, and could you help them in doing that? It's those same individuals that are now moving into business email compromise to try and facilitate the payments out. So we're seeing a lot of attack activity coming from Nigeria as an extension of that. And the outlook from Europol, FBI and NCSC is that this is going to be a continually emerging area. And because of that, it puts the focus on Office 365. You have the ability to log into it over the internet. It is out of the box, intentionally weak from a security point of view. You can apply lots of additional security controls, which we'll look at in some of the mitigation phases later on. But for it to be easily adopted and usable by a mass user base, some of those protection mechanisms can't be turned on by default because it would turn people off from wanting to engage and adopt this technology. So it does leave it open to attack. And the other thing as well is if you can get access to Mailbox, you get access to all of the corporate information that user has, not only in their email and attachments that are associated with emails and the email threads going in and out of the organisation, but it extends to OneDrive, SharePoint, other internal systems that are leveraged on Office 365's ecosystem. So you've got the whole Teams projects and all of that sensitive data that can be stored there. So it's a huge wealth of knowledge, and you can either attack it from an IP point of view or more commonly attack it from a theft of funds point of view. So how does an anatomy of an attack actually look? So there's three main phases to all of this. Now, the important thing to remember here is that individual attacks are always going to be delivered by the combination of the attack objectives, what is it the threat actor is trying to achieve, what is it that they feel is a win, and their own ability and skills to deliver that. So you'll always get variances and unique incidents, but broadly they fall into these three phases of an attack. So what do we mean by this? So initial compromise. This is gaining access to that mailbox. Now, we see these following areas of attacks across the instance we're managing. You've got, in descending order of volume, we're working from the top, which is brute force password attacks. Now, this is actually because out of the box MFA, multi-factor authentication, isn't enabled within the tenancy. It's easy to enumerate organizations that are using Office 365, and it's easy to then enumerate user accounts of those individuals that are using it, building up username lists, and then trying passwords. This is the audit log that would be created at the back end if an individual was being targeted, and they're all user login failed events within the log rapidly being iterated through, and at no point is any brute force protection kicking in from the Microsoft side. And then you can just keep going through word lists and looking to compromise the account. And if you're successful and you've got a username and password combination with no MFA enabled, you're going to gain full access to that mailbox. If that doesn't work, or you have a sufficiently complicated password, then the next thing we're looking at is generic phishing. That's the next largest volume of attacks that we're seeing. This won't surprise any of you if you're receiving emails on a day-to-day basis, but phishing emails tend to look a little bit like this. You'll get an unsolicited email in. This one was claiming to be from Bloomberg and wanting to share a voicemail. That play voice note is just a link to a compromised website that's serving a fake login page to try and gain your credentials. Interestingly, this is one I actually received, and in the bottom of the email, you can actually see that it's been at least tailored to reflect the domain that the receiver was reading the email from. So it can be a little bit tailored, but they're quite generic in intent. Then we've got the usual pretending to be a bank, spam and phishing emails that we see and get quite a lot. This one was actually using Dropbox as the payload mechanism. So again, they're trying to find different ways of getting past corporate filtering. So if you've got safe lists and you've got some form of categorization in play, then using Dropbox, if it's allowed by the organization, it'll get through. If it's not, obviously it'll get blocked. And then a more interesting one on this side. This was an email that was claiming to be settling an account for a payment that had been made into the organization, so not asking to make a payment out, so they're reversing the psychology of what you're expecting to see. But this one was slightly more interesting as well. So it was claiming to be a spreadsheet for you to download. If you clicked on the open button or the download button, it didn't download an attachment. It actually sent you to a website. And what we've actually found is this disassociates the activity of clicking a link to being asked to put credentials into a website for the user that actually responds to that. So we had a mailbox that had been compromised, and the end user was adamant that they had not put their credentials into a link that they had clicked on. And when we looked at the mailbox, we found the email that had been sent to them, and it was for a PDF. They'd clicked on the PDF, but the PDF was actually just a hyperlink to a website. So in their mind, they thought they'd clicked on a PDF to download. They didn't associate the tab that opened on their browser with a login screen as being associated with an event that they had caused, and then put their credentials into that page. And we could see the link being followed through the web filtering of that organization. So we could see the logical flow of the user and what they'd done, but mentally they hadn't seen that themselves. So it's an interesting trick. And on that one, we're seeing some more targeted attacks against organizations where we're using Microsoft Forms or Azure microsites, and we're seeing the threat actors spinning up those services to host a phishing page, because it will get around the filtering, because generally Microsoft Forms and Azure are going to be trusted by corporate filtering, and also it adds a degree of legitimacy to the request. And in fact, we've seen Azure URLs that have been created which contain the domain name of the company that's the email's pretending to be from, embedded into the domain name of the .azure, so it looks on the surface of it more legitimate. But again, they're about enticing users to click on a link. Then we move down to what I've tagged as phishing contacts. This is actually supply chain attacks. This is somebody within your own email threads that you have done business with, you've received emails from them in the past. It's that individual's account being compromised and being used to then target you further along the food chain within that organizational structure. And they tend to be a little bit more targeted around wanting to share OneDrive files. So this is what you'd end up presented with if you actually clicked on the link. And this is the example email, and that came from a real case that we dealt with. The Mailbox user received that from a named contact that they've been dealing with, wanting to share a file. They thought nothing more of it. They clicked on it, were presented with that screen, and gave away their credentials. And we see that happening quite often at the moment. And then basic auth. So what a lot of you probably may or may not be aware of within Office 365, certainly the legacy environments. Basic authentication is enabled by default. This means that even if you've got multi-factor authentication on the login, mailboxes can still support IMAP and POP3 and SMTP direct connections to the mailbox. They only require a username and password. So if you've managed to gain the username and password but can't log into the box because of MFA, but it's got legacy auth enabled, you can bypass MFA and still gain access to the mailbox, and we are seeing cases of that coming through. And the last one, OAuth. Now, OAuth is single sign-on tokens within being used by the Azure stack. You can build an application that requests permissions, and if the user permits that, they get access to the OAuth token, and that allows them to then gain access to any of the Azure services that user has permissions with. So the point there is, if you do investigate a breached mailbox, make sure that you go and kill all current OAuth tokens across the estate for that user. Otherwise, that can allow persistent access to that environment. It's at the bottom of this because we're not seeing a huge amount of it, because you have to entice a user, generally through a targeted phishing email, to go and give permissions to a malicious application. So it's quite a niche, narrow attack vector, but it is certainly happening. So what's happened there is that there's a number of different ways of attacking Office 365 to gain that initial compromise. And what we're looking to do there is gain access to a mailbox, and then the fun stuff can happen once we've done that. So what happens when we've gained access to a mailbox? So we see a number of different things occurring. One of the very first things that we see in quite a few cases, and certainly where defensive controls have not been implemented, is that the malicious actor will look to apply a mail forwarding rule out of that environment. The threat actor doesn't know how long they're going to have access to that inbox. It might be a general password change time. Something might spook the mailbox owner or the organization, and therefore shut down the mailbox. So they've got to try and get as much information out as quickly as possible. And so they'll do two things. They'll log into that box as soon as they've gained credentials, often within minutes of the credentials being disclosed. They'll set up a mail rule which will tag keywords. So any mail coming into that inbox matching those keywords will be automatically sent out. This is one from an investigation we did last year. The rule was added within minutes of the account being compromised, and sent email out to a Gmail account looking for purchase orders, credit cards, normally financial data as you'd expect. There's two other matches in there of note, Facebook and LinkedIn. So they're also looking to gain personal information about the individual as well. So if you had tied your Facebook account to your work email address and asked for a password reset that went to your work email address, this malicious actor is going to get a copy of that password reset email, so they would theoretically be able to start taking over other associated accounts. What else do we see? We see the use of the Office 365 ecosystem against itself. So this is the audit log that shows the OneDrive folder for the mailbox that have been compromised being used to exfiltrate data back out of the environment. So not having to send an email out with a remittance attachment to an email address which would disclose that email address being implicated. This was actually the remittance advice being uploaded to a folder. The folder having the link to the folder being created as a URL, and that being shared with a different actor. And then the 176.205 addresses, so the folder modified and the folder deleted, they are based out in the UAE, and that's all that actually that IP address was associated with. They came in, grabbed the file out of the folder and deleted the folder and ran away. They never logged into any of the mailboxes. They never did any of the other activity. They purely were interested in where the money had been paid out to. And the other thing that we're seeing at the moment when accounts are being compromised We're starting to see a shift. So we're seeing a lot of attack traffic coming out of Nigeria. And in one case, we tagged about 22 different IP addresses that were associated with gaining access to a particular mailbox over a period of time. But once they'd gained access to the mailbox and set up the mail forwarding rules, all further access into that environment had been done through VPN-based endpoints to try and hide the traffic. And a lot of them that coming through UK address space as well to try and geographically be similar to the traffic that would be being generated by legitimate access to that mail account. Now, the IP addresses in the black box are all part of the Avast IP blocks for their secure VPN solution that they sell to their customers. But interestingly, we're also seeing that same solution being used by malicious threat actors to hide their own traffic. So two things are either happening there. They're either compromising legitimate VPN accounts of legitimate customers and reusing those accounts for nefarious purposes, or they are taking the steps to purchase accounts for themselves to then use as a VPN service provider. I would say, as a takeaway from today, go and search your audit logs for those address ranges as an indicator of compromise, because if you see those in there and your end users aren't using VPNs from Avast, that would be a very good indication that you've got some compromised mailboxes. So that would be definitely worth going and having a look against. So, as you can see, a number of different things are going on once they've gained access to the mailbox. In business email compromise terms, they're looking to gain boxes that can actually affect payments out of the organisation, and that's generally what they're trying to do. If they have either achieved that, or the mailbox doesn't support that, or they're starting to feel that they're about to be caught, they then move on to the last stage in the attack, which would be Onward Compromise. So they'll use that box one last time to try and achieve some other activity. Generally, this is going to be hugely predicated by the individual's motive and what they're trying to achieve. If they've gained access to one box and they're looking to gain access to other boxes within the environment to stay within the tenancy, then they're going to be looking to look for shared folders, shared mailboxes that they can use the credentials that they've already got to move into other mailboxes. They may be looking to try and privilege their level of access to gain overall control of the entire tenancy, because obviously that would be amazing if they can, because then they can create their own accounts and do whatever else they want. But a lot of the time, what we actually find is that they just try and compromise another mailbox outside of that tenancy. And how do they do that? Well, they use all the contact lists in your email account that's been compromised, and they send out a phishing email to all of those contacts. They're also very lazy by nature, and so if something's worked once, they'll use it again. So you'll remember that from earlier on in the slides of the supply chain targeted email. They just use the exact same wording, and this is actually what we found this in that case. It was a word for word formatted exactly the same. They've just copy and pasted and used it again to send it straight back out. So, mitigation. Let's have a look at some things that we can do. So if we look at the initial compromise, obviously what we want to try and do is stop that compromise from happening in the first place, because that makes us all very happy because we don't have any investigations to go and deal with. So enable MFA. I still can't believe we're in 2019 and we're telling people to enable multi-factor authentication on cloud-based services. It just seems to me it should be done by default, but we're not in that place yet. So let's keep banging the drum. We need to enable MFA. It's not a panacea. It's not going to solve all your ills, but it certainly adds a layer of complexity to attacks. It makes it much harder to achieve, and it raises the bar from the skill set of the attacker having to match. And it also creates a lot of noise in logs. If we see stuff going on, it gives us an opportunity to see something happening before the bad stuff really occurs. Enable audit logs. We're still seeing tenancies that do not have audit logging enabled. Clearly, in an ideal world, we'll have enabled audit logs. We'll be extracting logs programmatically. We'll be feeding them into some form of SOC or SIEM platform to do the ongoing analysis. Most organisations aren't at that scale or in that environment where they can justify that. So a lot of the time we're dealing with single small businesses where at least have the audit logs available for interrogation. We dealt with a case over Christmas where 8 organisations had been compromised and were being used to systematically target a higher up tier 1 supplier within the supply chain. When we started going into those organisations to look at the audit logs, they weren't enabled. There was no investigation to then go and proceed, so it made looking at what was going on that much more difficult. So enable audit logs. Microsoft provide 90 days worth of logging as default. It's a hard stop. After 90 days, the logs start getting dropped, and there's no magic backup, so you need to make sure that you've got, if you want to go back beyond that, you need to retain them locally for yourself. And they're only available going forward from the day you enable the logs. They magically don't appear historically if you haven't had it previously enabled. So go and make sure that you've got all that. Disable basic auth. The amount of legacy accounts that still have basic auth enabled is frightening. Go in and turn it off. If you want MFA and you've implemented MFA, make sure that you've gone and turned off basic auth so you don't have that as some way of getting around your defenses. If none of that's worked and you have had a compromise and we're into the actions on stage, then let's actually start making their life of that a little bit more difficult and give yourself the opportunity to spot that the activity is occurring. Block mail forwarding. You can set it globally to not allow organizations to send email out of the environment to other domains. If you can do that, that's great, because it just stops that from occurring. You may have operational requirements that means that people have to be able to send emails out for particular reasons. If that's the case, you can generate reports that tell you what mail rules have been created and start reviewing them proactively, and that will give you a heads up. And interestingly on that, in fact, as an aside, when we were doing one of our investigations, we actually found a couple of users that weren't implicated in the compromise that were forwarding all of their corporate email to their home email addresses, which was in contravention of the exceptional use policy of that organisation. They're probably not doing it for any particularly bad reason, but they're just doing it bad work practice and actually exposes the organisation to some other challenges. So it does happen, even if it's not for a malicious point of view. Proactive log review. If you're collecting the audit logs, go and have a look in them. The amount of times when we've got our hands on the logs and we've gone and seen what's been going on, there's that period of grace where you can see that bad stuff's about to happen within your organisation, but get there before it actually turns into data loss or financial loss. So what does that actually look like? Well, this is a quick geographical mapping of malicious access to a mailbox that we investigated. You can see access from Saudi Arabia, from Nigeria, from the US, within the UK. All those ones within the UK are through those vast IP ranges that I showed you earlier on. So again, if you're just purely focusing on at a high level, oh, it's coming from the UK, it must be okay, that's not a good place to be thinking. And actually even some traffic from Ireland as well. This is one mailbox over the course of 1 week, and all of those access points, and I think the red ones are access in the region of at least 75 or more accesses from that from an account point of view for that IP address. Before the money was paid out, this access had started. So if somebody was looking at the logs for that type of access, you'd have seen it before the money got paid away from the organisation. So when I say look at the logs, I really mean go and look at the logs. In terms of Onward Compromise, there is no mitigation for that. The horse is bolted, it is gone. All you've done there is you've told all of your contacts you've had a breach. So that's not a really good place to be. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to give you any mitigation to get there, because actually we need to just avoid that from happening in the first place. And that is a quick look at what's currently going on in attacking Office 365. Happy to take questions. I think I'll get, oh, no, I don't get away. Right. Well, no, I can't. Oh, you've got this to throw.
Thank you. Talk to my talk. Okay, can you hear me?
I can.
That's fine. It's really a question from a user of Office 365 point of view, and to be quite honest, I'm not a fan. The issue I have with it is I have 2 Office 365 accounts, one for here, Napier, and one for Nescall, where I also work. You can't have 2 windows open with each of your email accounts open at the same time. It only lets you open one. But what I've found is if I log into one, it sometimes opens up the other one. And on more than one occasion, I've had all my emails mixed up in the one window. So it's a mixture of Nescall emails and a mixture of Napier emails. And I'm kind of trying to figure out what's going on where. How can I stop this, and should I be worried?
So I'm not a Microsoft Gold support partner, so I'm not going to be able to troubleshoot that for you. However, you can have both open. If you're using modern browsers, you can do incognito private browsing. Mm-hmm. So have those in 2 different private browsing sessions, and that will separate the bleed between the 2 authenticated sessions. Because we have the same when we're investigating multiple tenancies, but also we have our own tenancy open. We just open them in private browsing tabs, and that gets past that. The bleeding across into one mailbox is quite interesting. I haven't heard of it before, so I wouldn't be able to comment on that. But that's how you solve the other side of it.
Okay, incognito private browsing across two windows. I've never actually tried that. I must admit I was horrified the first time I opened the window and I saw my emails all mixed up and bled into each other. What's going on? Is there anything I'm not responsible for administrating the mailbox, is there anything in my organisation, but is there any advice I could go back and give them to kind of tighten up on this?
On the overall security,
yeah,
there's plenty of advice. Visit our website. We've got an entire blog on it, so it steps through all the different things you can do to tighten up on Office 365. But come and see me afterwards if you want.
That's very helpful, thank you.
Cool. Chap behind you would like the cube.
Right, I'm not very good at it.
Thank you. So actually, just before the question, I think the answer to the lady in front, they do all emails. That's outlook.com at Office 365. Have an all emails bucket. I think that's your problem. It's not bleeding together. It's just a view. But my question was very much, we talked about, or you talked about the things you need to do by default, and to a certain extent implying it's the client side issue for, why are we not enabling MFA? Why are you not enabling logs and things like that? I wonder, is this not a Microsoft problem?
Oh, no, sorry, yes, yeah. Don't get me wrong. It is a provider issue. These things should be, it's this usability versus security and robustness. The problem at the moment is I think big organizations need to make things really, really usable, really, really easily, really, really quickly. And that by nature blinkers you to having certain things turned on just because they should be. So yes, it's reliant on the end, at the moment, it's reliant on the end user being savvy enough to know that they need to go and turn this on. I don't think we're in a position where we can believe that that's the right starting point. So I do feel that the providers should be doing more to, by default, if you go back to the days of the Windows 2000 boxes, which used to have IIS, FTP, SMTP, all enabled by default, and suddenly that mind change came along, which was, no, we'll turn everything off by default, and you have to go and enable the features that are going to weaken your posture. Actually, maybe we need to get to that stage where security is turned on, and you turn it off if you want to take the risk. So I think we do need to change that dynamic, and that is definitely from a Microsoft. They should be leading that conversation.
It struck me that we quite regularly pick up on IoT providers of having default passwords and things like that. We always bang the drum of that, and they're starting to change their attitude. Maybe Microsoft doesn't have quite as much pressure on them to provide out-of-the-box default security to the level they should.
I think it's a maturity, and I think we've gone through it with operating systems. I think we just go through it with cloud services. I think it's just a natural flow that we need to go through, but hopefully we'll get over that at some point.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Brilliant. Feel free to come and find me afterwards. I'm here most of today. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Can I lob the microphone back?
Yeah.
Yeah, throw it back.